to move. Yeah. So that is because of your nervous system. So I'm going to talk about the nervous system, or specifically the vertebrate nervous system. So the nervous system is a complex network that processes information and coordinates behavior. And it has nervous tissue that is made up of cells like neurons and glia or neuroglia. So yung nervous system, divided siya into two, which are central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system, or the CNS and the PNS. And let me talk about the central nervous system first. The central nervous system is basically just the brain and the spinal cord. Next slide. On the other hand, the peripheral nervous system, or the PNS, are all the nerves that extend from the brain stem, the spinal cord, to the rest of the body that also relays signals back to the CNS. So, to summarize, yung CNS, yung spinal cord and brain. And yung peripheral nervous system ay lahat ng nerves outside that, the spinal cord and the brain. And the peripheral nervous system, or the PNS, is further divided into the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. Next slide po. Okay. So first, what is somatic nervous system? So para i-categorize natin siya, somatic, or S for skeletal, and then autonomic, A for automatic. So yung somatic, it controls voluntary muscles and conveys sensory information to the central nervous system, and it consists of the axons that conveys messages from the sense organs to the CNS and from the CNS to the muscles. So yung somatic nervous system, ito yung mga voluntary muscles natin na kaya nating i-control when moving. And on the other hand, the autonomic nervous system are the involuntary muscles like your heart, your intestines, and other organs of the body like respiration. So, again, yung autonomic, ito yung mga involuntary muscles or mga muscles na hindi natin kayang i-control. Like, for instance, your digestion. So, hindi mo naman talaga makakontrol yung digestion mo, unlike in somatic, which are voluntary muscles like how you move your hands or your muscles na kaya mong i-control. And the autonomic nervous system is then divided into the sympathetic and parasympathetic nerves. So the sympathetic expends energy and the parasympathetic conserves energy. Next slide po. Ay balik. Wala pala. Okay, so to put it simply, sorry po. The sympathetic nerves, ito yung mga fight or flight response. And then yung parasympathetic nerves ay for the rest and digest functions. So again, under siya ng autonomic. So for example, kapag you're in danger, let's say, and your sympathetic nervous system will increase your heart rate and breathing while it slows down your digestion. Kumbaga, yung sympathetic nervous system, siya yung rason para lumakas yung tibok ng puso mo or yung breathing mo is hindi siya controllable or malakas yung pintig ng puso mo dahil sa danger or sa threat na situation na or sa situation na dangerous. On the other hand, yung parasympathetic nervous system, kapag naman relax ka, ito yung binabagalan niya yung heart rate mo, and dito na pinopromote niya yung digestion kasi nga kapag active si somatic, hindi sympathetic, I'm sorry. If active si sympathetic, hindi pwedeng si parasympathetic magi-give way siya for sympathetic and vice versa. And next po. Bago natin i-discuss yung brain and spinal cord, which are parts of the central nervous system, what is meninges first? So, ito yung between the brain and the skull, we have the meninges. And these are the three protective membrane layers na pinoprotektahan ng layer na to ang ating brain para maiwasan natin ang injuries, infections, at impact sa brain na pwedeng dahil sa isang accident, let's say. And these meninges has three layers or membrane layers. First is the dura mater, or also known as tough mother. So dura means hard and mater means mother. And this is the outermost and toughest layer. So again, the dura mater acts like a thick protective layer to shield the brain. And between the dura mater and the skull, we have what we call the epidural space. Wait, let me type it. Okay, so ito nga yung between the dura mater and the skull, we have epidural space. So yung epidural space, may blood vessels siya and fat. And kapag, let's say may injury or accident, kapag napuno ng blood ang space na to, pwedeng magkaroon ng epidural hematoma or what we call as EDH. Epidural. And next layer, we have the arachnoid mater, or also known as spider mother. So this layer is the middle layer. And tinatawag natin siyang spider mother because of its web-like or spider-like structure. And ang layer na to, may ano siya, cerebrospinal fluid or CSF. So yung cerebrospinal fluid or CSF, tumutulong siya para ma-nourish yung brain and maalis yung waste products sa brain. And beneath this layer is what we call the subdural space. So kung sa dura mater, between the dura mater and the skull, we have the epidural space. Dito naman is the subdural space. Subdural space, wait. And kapag naman napuno ng blood ang space na to, pwedeng due to an injury or accident, pwedeng mag-cause ng subdural hematoma, which is often due to head trauma. And next, we have the pia mater, which is also known as the soft mother. And this layer is the innermost layer, and this layer is thin and soft. So ito na yung parang nagko-cover sa brain, and it follows the grooves and folds of the brain like the gyri and the sulci. So between the arachnoid mater and pia mater is what we called as subarachnoid space. Yeah. So like the subdural space in the arachnoid mater, may cerebrospinal fluid din si pia mater. And this fluid also acts as a cushion that helps remove waste products from the brain. So, what is meningitis? So, the meningitis, ito yung kapag nagkaroon ng inflammation na sa meninges. And it is a serious condition that which is life-threatening kapag hindi nagamot. So, let's talk about the central nervous system. Next is the brain. So yeah. So the brain is the command center of the CNS, and it is a part of the central nervous system that consists of the cerebrum, the cerebellum, and the brainstem. So what is the cerebrum? The cerebrum is the largest part of the brain. Wait, may isasend po akong 3D model. Wait, I'm sorry. I'm not sure if pwede niyo po siyang i-open para makita niyo yung parts of the brain. So yung again, so this is part of the brain, which is the cerebrum. And this is the largest part of the brain, which is responsible for higher functions like thinking, memory, emotions, and voluntary movement. And the cerebrum is broken up into various lobes like the frontal lobe, parietal, occipital, and the temporal lobe. Next is the cerebellum. So the cerebellum is basically just a small cerebrum. If nakikita niyo po yung model, parang maliit lang siyang cerebrum. And this is located at the back of the brain, which is essential for coordination, your balance, and posture. And the last part is the brainstem, which is the bridge between the brain and spinal cord, and is responsible for automatic functions like breathing and heart rate. So take note that the brainstem is house of most of the cranial nerves. Papag-usapan pa natin yung cranial nerves later, but let's talk about the spinal cord first. So, the spinal cord. It is the part of the CNS that runs through the spinal column and transmits sensory and motor information between the body and the brain. So, yung spinal cord is composed of gray matter and white matter. Kapag sinabi natin gray matter, located siya sa parang gitna ng spinal cord, and it has an, if nakita niyo po yung outline namin, andun po yung image ng gray matter and white matter. So it has an H-shaped or butterfly-shaped appearance kapag tiningnan siya in a cross-section. And then the gray matter is a bundle of neuronal cell bodies or soma, and then the dendrites and unmyelinated axons, which makes it appear as gray. On the other hand, the white matter. So yung white matter naman, kumbaga, if H-shaped yung gray matter sa gitna, yung nagsasurround sa gray matter, that is the white matter. And it consists of myelinated axons. So, the white matter, kasi nga, composed of myelinated axons siya, which has myelin sheath, so it has full of fats. Kaya kapag tiningnan siya, it appear as white. That's why it's called as white matter. So, the spinal cord is divided into 5 segments. We have the cervical, the thoracic, the lumbar, the sacral, and coccygeal. And each of these segments has a pair of nerves responsible for different functions. So, sa spinal cord, sa lahat, in total, sa lahat ng region na to, may 31 pairs of nerves. And the cervical has 8 pairs of nerves, 12 for thoracic, 5 in lumbar and sacral, and 1 in coccygeal. So, yeah, let's talk about these regions. Next po. Next slide, please. Thank you po. So first region is the cervical region. So nabanggit ko kanina na may 8 pairs of nerves sa cervical. Therefore, it is from C1 to C8. And this is also called as the neck and upper body commander. So yung cervical region controls the movement and sensations, specifically in the neck, shoulders, arms, hands, and even the diaphragm. So kapag nagkaroon ng injury sa cervical region, pwedeng magkaroon ng quadriplegia, or ang tawag, also known as the paralysis of all 4 limbs, or the paralysis of the entire body below the neck. And pwede ring mag-cause ng, yung injury pwede ring mag-cause ng breathing difficulties. So we have C1, the suboccipital nerve, or also known as motor control of neck muscles. C2, greater occipital nerve or scalp sensation. C3, may send pala akong link sa spinal cord. Wait lang. To visualize the spinal cord. Oh my God. Ito. Wait, sorry. Ayan po. Si Diane na raw po mag-send. Thank you. So, ayan po. To visualize the spinal cord and its parts. So, asan na ba ako? The lesser occipital nerve, which is for scalp and ear sensation, and then the supraclavicular nerves, or the shoulders and upper chest sensation, and then the phrenic nerve, which is diaphragm or the control for breathing, and then the brachial plexus contributor, which is for control. It controls our movement, and then the radial nerve contributor, or the triceps and wrist control, and then the last part is the ulnar nerve contributor, or the hand and finger movement. Next region is the thoracic. Next po. Okay, so yung thoracic, may 12 pairs of nerve siya. Therefore, it is from T1 to T12. So this one is in charge for the upper body or the upper trunk stabilizer. The T1 contributes to the brachial plexus, which is the upper limb movement. From T2 to T6, which is the intercostal nerves, to control chest and rib movement. And then the last part is the T7 to T12, which is thoraco-abdominal nerves, to control abdominal muscles. Next region po. Next slide. Thank you. So, like the thoracic, the lumbar, mali pala, sorry. The lumbar is the lower body controller. If the thoracic is the upper body controller, sa lower body naman sa lumbar. So the L1 is iliohypogastric and ilioinguinal nerves, which is for lower abdomen and the pelvis sensation. And then the genitofemoral nerve for inner thigh sensation. The L3 femoral nerve contributor or the thigh flexion. The obturator nerve contributor and the which is for thigh adduction. And then the lumbosacral plexus contributor, which is for leg and foot movement. So take note na yung L5, which is the lumbosacral plexus contributor, ay connected na siya sa sacral region. That's why it's called as lumbosacral. Next po. Okay, so like the lumbar region, may 5 nerves din sa sacral, and this one is the pelvic regulator. The S1 is the sciatic nerve contributor, which is for leg movement. The tibial and common fibular nerve contributor, which is for foot movement. The pelvic nerves for bladder and bowel control. The pudendal nerve contributor or the genital sensation and pelvic floor control. And then the coccygeal plexus contributor, which is for rectal and perineal functions. And then the last region is the coccygeal, also known as CO1 or CO1, which is the tailbone nerve or the last nerve. So this one is the smallest spinal region that controls skin sensation around the tailbone, and is also known, it is commonly or less commonly affected by injury, but it also plays a role in pelvic floor functions like the sacral region. So next slide po. So the spinal cord again. The spinal cord has specialized roots, which are the dorsal roots and then the ventral roots. The dorsal roots carry sensory input to the CNS, and then the ventral roots carry motor output from CNS. Kumbaga, halimbawa, when you accidentally touch a hot stove, this is where the sensory input will carry, the dorsal root will carry sensory input from your hand or your sense organs to your brain or the CNS. And then the ventral roots will then, from the CNS, magkakaroon ng command si brain and the CNS. Magkakaroon ng command si CNS to make a movement like removing your hand from that hot pot. Hot stove. And then the dorsal root ganglia is the house sensory neuron cell bodies, which is located outside the CNS. And then the motor neuron cell bodies, which are located inside the spinal cord. So may cluster si neuron. Kapag nasa labas siya ng CNS, like for instance, nasa peripheral nervous system siya, tinatawag natin siyang ganglion. Pero kapag nasa loob naman siya ng CNS, like the brain and the spinal cord, this is what we call as nucleus. Next po. Moving on to one of the parts of the peripheral nervous system, which is the autonomic nervous system. So the autonomic nervous system consists of neurons that receive information from and send commands to the heart, intestines, and other organs. So the autonomic nervous system controls involuntary bodily functions like yung heart rate mo, digestion, and even your respiration. Nabanggit ka na kanina na this is for the involuntary muscles or bodily functions. And then it has two divisions, which are sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. Next slide. So let's talk about the sympathetic nervous system. So the sympathetic nervous system is responsible for the fight or flight response. So it is also known as the thoracolumbar division kasi yung mga nerve fibers and this sympathetic nervous system originate from the thoracic and lumbar regions ng spinal cord. And the sympathetic nervous system is essential for your breathing and heart rate as it increases your breathing and heart rate, and it decreases digestive activity. And it also increases your alertness, and gumagamit pala ng norepinephrine si sympathetic nervous system, or also known as noradrenaline. And it is for sweat glands, adrenal glands, blood vessel muscles, and hair erector muscles. The sweat glands, the adrenal glands, blood vessel muscles, and hair erector muscles ay nagre-receive lang ng input from the sympathetic nervous system and not from the parasympathetic nervous system. And next, let's talk about the parasympathetic nervous system. Next po. Next po. Hi. Ayan, so the parasympathetic nervous system, or also known as the rest and digest. So yung sympathetic is the fight or flight, and then the parasympathetic is the rest and digest. So the parasympathetic nervous system facilitates vegetative and non-emergency responses like digestion. And it is also known as craniosacral division because the parasympathetic nervous system consists of cranial nerves like the yung cranial nerves po is babanggitin namin yung lahat ng cranial nerves later, but babanggitin ko ngayon na cranial nerves is yung nasa parasympathetic nervous system lang. So first is the oculomotor, which is essential for pupils constriction, and then we have the facial nerve for your digestion or salivary glands, and then the glossopharyngeal, which is also for digestion, and then the vagus nerves, which is like constricting of heart and airways. And then yung vagus nerve, parang siya yung nagko-command sa digestive system natin na mag-activate at mag-release ng digestive enzymes and hormones to promote digestion. And then para means beside or related to. So yung parasympathetic nervous system, it promotes sexual arousal, including erection in males. So again, the parasympathetic ganglia slow heart rate, it aids digestion, and use acetylcholine as a neurotransmitter. So next, let's compare the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system in terms of their function. Next po. Sa ano na po, comparison ng parasympathetic. Okay, thank you. So, my example is, let's say you're running or someone is chasing after you. In this case, yung heart rate and breathing mo, it will increase. Okay, so your pupils will most likely dilate, and on the other hand, your digestion will decrease its activity kasi nga due to the activation of sympathetic nervous system na pinaprepare yung body mo for the fight or flight response. So once this activity is over, yung heart rate mo and breathing will gradually slow down, and your pupils may constrict, and your digestive system will become more active kasi um, to help restore homeostasis, or what we call the balance in the internal environment in your body. And so again, the parasympathetic ganglia uses acetylcholine as a neurotransmitter. Thus yung sympathetic nervous system, it increases alertness at gumagamit siya ng norepinephrine or noradrenaline. So take note lang po na may two types of adrenaline, which is noradrenaline and adrenaline. So yung noradrenaline, or also known as norepinephrine, na ginagamit ni sympathetic nervous system, it is a hormone and also a neurotransmitter. While yung epinephrine or yung adrenaline is just a hormone. Kaya naman, halimbawa, so may real life example po. So halimbawa, you like someone and nakita mo siya, or accidentally nagkita kayo, or halimbawa may class and then nagkita kayo. So in this case, the sympathetic nervous system will activate, and kapag ganito, bibilis or lalakas yung tibok ng puso mo. So ang reason nito ay dahil sa release ng norepinephrine bilang neurotransmitter. At kasabay naman nito, yung adrenal glands mo ay maglalabas din ng adrenaline or epinephrine para mas lalo pang pataasin ng energy and alertness mo. And basically, yung katawan mo, para siyang nagre-react na as if nasa isang intense na situation ka. Kahit na, let's say, it's just your normal activity, like pagkikita nyo lang yun. On the other hand, your parasympathetic nervous system will take place in cases like you're calm or comfortable ka na with that person's presence. So, unlike in sympathetic nervous system, bumabalik sa normal yung heart rate mo in parasympathetic. Next is the hindbrain. Okay. So the hindbrain, or also known as rhombencephalon or parallelogram brain, is the posterior and most primitive part of the brain na siyang binubuo ng medulla, pons, and cerebellum. So take note na yung so to start pala dito, the brain has three major divisions: the hindbrain, the midbrain, and then the forebrain. So yung ibang neuroscientists, mas ginagamit nila yung Greek term like rhombencephalon for hindbrain, mesencephalon for midbrain, and then prosencephalon for forebrain. So, kaya tinawag na rhombencephalon si hindbrain kasi it resembles a rhombus or a type of parallelogram shape. So, and this name was given because during early brain development in embryos, the hindbrain or yung rhombencephalon ay parang diamond shape siya kapag tiningnan mo from above. And the structure of this part of the brain gives it a geometric look which resembles a rhombus, which is why it's called as parallelogram brain or rhombencephalon. So let's talk about the parts of the hindbrain. First is the medulla or medulla oblongata. So yung medulla, it is also known as medulla oblongata, which is an enlarged extension of the spinal cord. As you can see in the figure presented, that is the medulla. So this part of the brain keeps us alive, like literal, as it controls vital functions like your breathing, heart rate, blood pressure, and reflexes like paglinok or swallowing and coughing. Pero due to the abundant presence of opiate receptors like in the medulla, so may maraming opiate receptors sa medulla, and itong receptor na to, it suppresses activity, and kagaya na lamang ng ibang painkillers, like in the Philippines we have morphine sulfate. So hindi talaga siya parang pinopromote sa Philippines yung mga painkillers na may opiate, nagpa-produce ng opiate receptor. Kasi nga, medyo delikado siya. So, opiates can produce a dangerous decrease in heart rate and breathing, and kapag na-overwhelm yung mga receptor na to, pwede siya mag-cause ng pagbagal ng, as in sobra sa heart rate and your breathing, na pwedeng magdulot ng coma or worse, kamatayan. Next is the pons. Yeah, the pons is the Latin term for bridge, and it acts as a bridge for neural communication, and it also facilitates as a bridge between different parts of the brain. So, ayan po sa figure yung pons, yung pons. So, it lies anterior or positioned closer to the front and ventral toward the stomach to the medulla. So, kaunting information lang po. If we say dorsal, so this is different from dorsal root. Yung dorsal, imagine or visualize a brain, or let's say a four-legged animal or a dog. Yung back ay kapag nakatayo yung dog, yung back part niya, that is what you call as dorsal. And if kinumpare mo siya sa brain, parang yung back or taas ng brain siya. And then yung stomach part ng dog, which is what we call as ventral. So mga direction to ha. Yung if kinumpare mo siya, parang sa ilalim siya ng brain. So that is what you call as dorsal and ventral. And then the pons, like the medulla, it contains nuclei for several cranial nerves and it plays key role in sending sensory and motor signals, parang sa medulla. And it helps regulate sleep, breathing, and movement coordination. So may fun fact po about sa pons. Yung dreams natin or yung panaginip, it originates from this part of the brain. And the pons is involved in the sleep cycle, especially in the REM or isa siyang cycle ng sleep, the rapid eye movement, where most of the dreams occurs. And then the last part of the hindbrain is the cerebellum. So the cerebellum is also called as the little brain kasi nga nabanggit ko kanina na parang hindi ko sure kung nabanggit ko, but it is just a small lang siya na cerebrum. So this structure plays a key role in balance and coordination and fine motor skills. So kapag wala yung cerebellum, simple tasks like walking, running, or even tying your shoes would be impossible. And kahit na yung cerebellum, it only takes up only about 10% of the brain's volume, it contains over 50% of the brain's neurons, meaning sobrang daming neurons sa cerebellum, like 50%. So the head and the organs that connect to the medulla and adjacent areas are composed of 12 cranial nerves, each is paired. So nabanggit ko kanina na may 12 cranial nerves tayo, and let's talk about it. Next po. So these are the cranial nerves. So the cranial nerves come and go back into either side of the brain and the brain stem. And the following are the cranial nerves. First is the olfactory. Ika-categorize ko lang po siya into sensory, motor, or both. So yung olfactory is for the sensory, and it is essential for smell, or its major function is for the smell. And then the optic, which is also for sensory, is essential for vision. And then the oculomotor, or para sa motor to, as you can see, my motor na word. So it is for the control of eye movements, like constriction of pupils or pupil. And then the trochlear, which is also for motor. So it is also for control of eye movements. Next slide po. The fifth cranial nerve is trigeminal. So itong trigeminal, this is both for sensory and motor nerves. And this is essential for skin sensation for most of the face, and then the control of jaw muscles for chewing and swallowing. And then the next cranial nerve is subducens, which is also for control of eye movement. So yung This is also for sensory pal. So yung oculomotor, trochlear, and then abducens ay lahat sila for the control of eye movements. And then addition lang sa abducens, it is also for the sensation of the face and movement of jaw. Next cranial nerve is facial, which is for both for sensory and motor. So this one is essential for the taste from the interior 2/3 of the tongue, control of facial expressions, crying, salivation, and dilation of the head's blood vessels. And then the eighth cranial nerve, which is statoacoustic. So yung statoacoustic po ang older term na tawag sa kanya, and we call it now as vestibulocochlear, and it is for sensory. So this is for hearing or sound and equilibrium for balance. Next slide po. So next cranial nerve is glossopharyngeal, which is for both sensory and motor, and this one is for the taste and other sensations from throat and posterior third of the tongue, like swallowing, salivation, and throat movements during speech, like what I'm doing now. So glossopharyngeal comes from glosso, which means tongue, and pharyngeal, which means throat. Next is vagus, which is also both for sensory and motor nerves. So this one is the sensations from neck and thorax, like control of throat, esophagus, and larynx, and parasympathetic nerves to stomach, intestines, and other organs. Take note po na yung vagus is the only cranial nerve that goes beyond the head and the neck. So, kasi nga, it innervates the heart, the lungs, and digestive and urinary tracts, and others, like respiration. And then the accessory, which is for motor nerves. So this one is the control of neck and shoulder movements, like shrugging. And then the last cranial nerve is hypoglossal, which is also for motor nerve. So it is the control of muscles of the tongue, and it is located under the tongue. And next part of the brain is the midbrain. Ayan. So the midbrain, also known as mesencephalon or the middle brain. So this part of the brain is involved in sensory processing and movement regulation. And it is more prominent in reptiles, amphibians, and fish. So yung midbrain, may tinatawag tayong tectum, and this is the roof of the midbrain. So this part of the brain processes sensory information, and it has swellings on each side, which are the superior colliculus and then the inferior colliculus. So etong dalawa na to, etong swellings ng tectum ay importante for sensory processing. Let's say that the superior colliculus is for vision, and then the inferior colliculus is for hearing or auditory. And then we have the tegmentum, which is Latin word for covering. So yung tegment, if the tectum is the roof of the midbrain, the tegmentum is under the tectum, which is the intermediate level of the midbrain. So it also plays a role in movement and arousal. So let's say if you're sleepy pero narinig mo na tinawag yung pangalan mo, etong brain na to is the one that wakes you up. And then the last part of the midbrain, which is substantia nigra. So this one is located in the midbrain and is essential for movement, and it produces dopamine. So it gives rise to a dopamine-containing pathway that facilitates readiness for movement. So kapag nag-degenerate yung part na, or area na to ng midbrain, pwedeng magkaroon ng Parkinson's disease ang isang tao, which may cause tremors and difficulty in movement. So next part of the brain, which is the forebrain. Next slide. Yeah. So the forebrain. And then next na ba? I'm sorry. Wait lang po.
Wait lang,
Okay.
nag-delete yata na paglipat. Wait, i-stop na sa ko muna. Sorry po.
Go lang. So ayan, the forebrain is also known as prosencephalon or the forward brain. So this part of the brain is the largest one and most complex part. So yung forebrain, it controls thinking, your emotions, and voluntary movements like walking or such. And then the forebrain includes several major structures like the cerebral cortex, the thalamus, the hypothalamus, and basal ganglia. So the prosencephalon is divided into two parts, which are diencephalon and telencephalon. So yung thalamus, hypothalamus, pituitary gland, epithalamus, and subthalamus are what forms the diencephalon. Yung telencephalon naman is composed of the cerebral cortex, the basal ganglia, limbic system, and then the olfactory bulb. It is composed of, yung forebrain, it is composed of two hemispheres, which are the left and right hemisphere. And each of these hemispheres receives sensory information. So yung in some studies, it says that the left hemisphere is often associated with language and logic, while the right hemisphere is often linked to creativity and spatial awareness. So next, next. Sorry. So let's talk about the limbic system, which is a part of telencephalon of the forebrain. The limbic system, or limbus, the Latin word for border, it regulates emotions, motivation, and memory. And it forms a border around the brainstem, as you can see in the figure presented. So it has structures like the amygdala, which processes emotion like fear, the olfactory bulb for smell, the hypothalamus for homeostasis or balance in the internal environment, the hippocampus for memory formation, and then the cingulate gyrus of the cerebral cortex. So yung limbic system, it influences our behavior, our decision making, and our emotional responses to some situation. And kapag nagkaroon ng damage in this area, it can lead to emotional instability, memory loss, or difficulty in forming new memories. So first part of the limbic system is the amygdala. So this is a part of the sorry. It is a part of the circuit that is most central for evaluating emotional information, especially with regard to fear. So, maliit na part lang to. It is almond-shaped structure that processes emotion like fear, aggression, and anxiety. Yung amygdala, it helps us recognize threats and triggers our fight or flight response or the sympathetic. So kapag nagkaroon ng overactivity in the amygdala, it is often linked to anxiety disorders and PTSD. So halimbawa, if you got bitten by a dog as a child, yung amygdala mo, it might make you fear dogs kahit na yung dog is harmless. So parang nadadala natin siya even as adults. So this is because maybe because of trauma like that. Next is the cerebral cortex, which is the outer portion of the forebrain. So this one is the outer layer of the brain and is often referred to as the gray matter. due to its color and is responsible for higher cognitive functions like your perception, decision making, and even language. So yung cerebrum, it is a Latin word for, it means brain. And then yung cortex means bark or shell. So, which makes sense kasi yung cerebral cortex serves as the outer covering of the cerebrum. And then the cerebral cortex is divided into 4 lobes. The frontal lobe for reasoning, which is essential for reasoning, problem solving, and voluntary movement. And then the parietal lobe for sensory information, halimbawa touch and spatial awareness. And then the occipital lobe for visual or visualization. And then the temporal lobe for auditory, memory, and language comprehension. So beneath the cerebral cortex, may subcortical structures tayo na, and it helps process and relay information like the thalamus and basal ganglia. And let's talk about the thalamus. So the thalamus is a pair of structures which has left and right region and the center of the forebrain. So makikita po natin siya in the center of the forebrain na may left and right. This one is paired kaya may left and right region siya. So it is derived from a Greek word meaning anteroom or inner chamber or bridal bed. And it acts as a relay station for sensory information and it sends signals to the cerebral cortex. Yung thalamus, it helps process sight, sound, touch, and taste before we become consciously aware of them. So may exception dito, yung olfactory information. So unlike other sensory information or signals, yung olfactory or the smell, hindi siya nagpapass through the thalamus. Instead, the olfactory signals, it travels directly to the olfactory receptors na nasa nose, papunta sa olfactory bulb, and then the primary olfactory cortex, tapos dumadaan din siya sa limbic system like the amygdala and hippocampus. Meaning, hindi na talaga siya dumadaan sa thalamus. So, this direct pathway is why smells are often strongly linked to emotion and memories kasi nga, yung olfactory system ay may connection siya sa limbic system na kung saan ay importante sa or responsible for emotional processing and memory formation. So halimbawa, may certain perfume na naalala ka sa isang tao. For instance, may naamoy kang gantong smell and naalala mo yung isang tao. Kasi nga, yung olfactory system ay dumadaan siya sa limbic system na responsible for memory and emotional response. And then the next part is the hypothalamus. So yung hypothalamus, it is a small area near the base of the brain and just ventral to the thalamus. And it has widespread connections to with the rest of the brain. So hypo means under. So yung hypothalamus, it is located under the thalamus. And it contains distinct nuclei which we examine na itatopic siya sa chapters on motivation and emotion. So the hypothalamus communicates with the pituitary gland and it regulates essential functions like maintaining homeostasis or the balance in the internal environment. And then hunger, temperature, hormone release through the pituitary gland, and sleep-wake cycles or your body clock or what we call as circadian rhythm. So yung hypothalamus, again, it is essential for control of eating, drinking, temperature control, and reproductive behaviors and memory formation. So may example tayo dyan. So, halimbawa, gutom ka. Yung, kapag ang rason dito is bumababa yung blood sugar mo or your stomach feels empty, yung hypothalamus mo, it will detect this and it will send signals that will make you feel hungry. So, kapag naman nabusog ka na, your hypothalamus will then send signals for you to stop eating. And next is the pituitary gland. Yeah, the pituitary gland is an endocrine hormone-producing gland attached to the base of the hypothalamus. It synthesizes hormones that the blood carries to organs through the body in response to messages from the hypothalamus. So yung pituitary gland, it is often called as the master gland kasi nga it controls many hormone-related functions. But although it is called as the master gland, it is still controlled by the hypothalamus, which it also releases hormones that regulate various bodily functions like it regulates growth, your metabolism, stress responses, and even reproduction. So yung hypothalamus, siya yung nagda-direct ng activity ng pituitary gland. And next we have the basal ganglia, which is also part of cerebral cortex. So basal ganglia is a group of subcortical structures lateral to the thalamus. It includes three major structures: the caudate nucleus, the putamen, and then the globus pallidus. So yung basal ganglia, ito yung deep structure sa brain natin, which is involved in movement control, your habit formation, and even your motor learning. Yung basal ganglia, tumutulong siya for us to perform smooth, coordinated movements and para sa mga automatic behaviors natin like maglalakad or magta-type. And kapag nagkaroon ng dysfunction sa basal ganglia, take note that it is linked to movement disorders like Parkinson's disease or too little movement, and Huntington's disease, which is too much movement. Kaya yung basal ganglia, importante siya kasi it helps us perform smooth and not uncoordinated or jerky movements or unnecessary movements. And then the basal forebrain, which is one of the structures on the ventral surface of the forebrain. Tinatawag din si basal forebrain as nucleus basalis. So it receives input from the hypothalamus and basal ganglia, and it sends axons that release acetylcholine to widespread areas in the cerebral cortex. So yung basal forebrain, importante siya para sa ating learning, memory, and even our attention. So yung basal forebrain, major producer din siya ng acetylcholine, which is a neurotransmitter for focus, which is essential for focus and cognition. And kapag nagkaroon ng damage sa basal forebrain, pwedeng magkaroon ng Alzheimer's disease ang isang tao and other cognitive impairments related to Alzheimer's. And since acetylcholine is essential for cognition, boosting acetylcholine levels is a key approach in treating Alzheimer's and related conditions. Take note na sa ngayon, wala pa talagang actual treatment or medication para sa Alzheimer's disease. Yung mga available treatments or medication ngayon is only to slow down the progression of Alzheimer's and not actually treat it. Okay, sorry. Next is hippocampus. So the hippocampus, from the Latin word means seahorse, is a shape this is the shape suggested by the hippocampus. So makikita niyo po sa figure presented na para siyang seahorse shape. So it is a large structure between the thalamus and the cerebral cortex and mostly toward the posterior of the forebrain. And it is critical for certain types of memories, especially memories for individual events and monitoring where you are or where you are going. So the hippocampus, importante siya for forming new memories and a spatial memory. And the hippocampus also helps us convert short-term memories into long-term ones. And kapag nagkaroon ng damage sa hippocampus, pwedeng magkaroon ng amnesia or difficulty learning new information ng isang tao. And one fun fact about the hippocampus, yung a famous study by Eleanor Maguire in 2000, they found out that London taxi drivers have larger hippocampus than those that are than non-drivers. Kasi nga, yung mga taxi drivers ay may extensive knowledge sila sa spatial or, the city routes. So, meaning parang na-develop yung hippocampus nila kasi na-develop din yung spatial memory nila, unlike those who are not studying or who are not that familiar with city routes or spatial memory. So, and the last part is the ventricles. The ventricles are four fluid-filled cavities within the brain. So, yung four fluid cavities sa brain is what we call as ventricles. At yung ventricles na to ay may two large lateral, may hemispheres. Sorry. And then, yung ventricles na to ay nagpo-produce ng cerebrospinal fluid or CSF. So, again, yung CSF ay parang nagpo-protect siya sa brain by cushioning it from impact, halimbawa due to an injury or accident. And it also provides nutrients to the brain and the spinal cord, and it removes waste from the brain. So, while the third ventricle connects toward their posterior, position at the midline, separate mali ang tono. It separates the left thalamus from the right thalamus. So, yeah. And that will be everything about the structure and parts of the vertebrate nervous system. Now, let's, next slide po. Yeah. May cerebrospinal fluid. Ay, na-discuss na pala yung kanina. Next slide po. Now, let's take a closer look at one of its most vital and complex structure, the command center for thinking, perception, and decision-making, the cerebral cortex.
Thank you, Dr. Garcia, for providing a comprehensive overview of the structure and the parts of the vertebrate nervous system. This is Dr. Diane, and let us now dissect further the parts of the brain by taking a closer look at the organization of the most prominent part of the mammalian brain, which is the cerebral cortex. Before anything, can I receive reacts from the class para ma-check lang kung gising yung buong class? Okay, thank you. So, the cerebral cortex is the outermost layer of the brain and is responsible for higher order functions such as sensory perception, cognition, and voluntary movement. Since yung pinaka-function ng cerebral cortex ay mostly about reasoning, problem solving, memory, and language, ito ay considered as the control room ng utak natin. Ginagamit natin ang cerebral cortex sa napakaraming bagay. For example, kapag naglalaro tayo ng online games, tinutulungan tayo ng cerebral cortex na gumawa ng decisions kung ano yung nararapat na defense and attacks para matalo natin yung kalaban natin. Or kahit sa everyday conversations with family and friends, tinutulungan tayo ng cerebral cortex na tukuyin kung ano yung context and setting para masabi natin ang mga tamang salita na nararapat para sa isang sitwasyon. If we look closely at the picture, there are two layers. The outermost layer is made up of gray matter. It's present in both the cerebrum and cerebellum. Kaya kulay gray or somewhat pinkish gray yung appearance ng part na to kasi maraming neuronal cell bodies na pwedeng matagpuan sa gray matter. And the axon extending inwards are called white matter. Maputi siya kasi galing ang appearance ng white matter sa myelin sheets. And well, myelin sheets is packed with lipids that reflect light, kaya pale at shiny tingnan ang white matter. Ang kaibahan ng gray matter at white matter ay yung white matter ang responsible para mag-carry out ng information. Ito yung nagbibigay ng signals at instructions sa iba't ibang part ng utak natin. Habang yung gray matter naman ay ang nagtatanggap ng signals na binibigay ng white matter, tas iniintindi kung ano yung mga information na yon. The cerebral cortex is divided into two hemispheres, the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. But how do these hemispheres communicate with each other? Next slide, please. Well, bawat hemisphere puno ng napakaraming neurons at nagko-communicate sila through bundles of axons or also known as commissural fibers. These fibers connects the two hemispheres. Ang pinakaunang commissural fiber ay ang corpus callosum. This is the thickest among all the commissural fibers. It connects the cerebral hemispheres and allows them to share information with each other and coordinate activities. Meanwhile, the interior commissure is a smaller bundle of axons that connects parts of the temporal lobes. Yung temporal lobes natin ay matatagpuan sa kabilang sides ng ulo natin. Malapit lang siya sa temples. Tapos yung anterior commissure, nasa gitna siya para i-connect ang dalawang temporal lobes. May iba ring ibang commissural fibers, such as posterior commissure that runs along the middle to connect the brainstem, and the hippocampal commissure na by the name alone ay malalaman natin na kinoconnect niya ang hippocampus, pero yung dalawa, yung corpus callosum tsaka yung anterior commissure yung pinaka-common at pinaka-prominent sa cerebral cortex. Next slide, please. In human and most other mammals, the cerebral cortex contains up to six distinct laminae, which are the layers of cell bodies that are parallel to the surface of the cortex and are separated from each other by layers of fibers. The laminae differ in thickness and prominence depending on the region of the cortex. Each layer has unique properties and roles. So let's look closely at the six distinct layers of the laminae. Next slide, please. The lamina 1, or the molecular layer, is the outermost layer that has relatively few neurons and is composed of dendrites and long axons. The lamina 2, or the external granular layer, contains small and densely packed pyramidal cells. The lamina 3, or the pyramidal cell layer, consists of medium-sized pyramidal cells which sends outputs to other cortical areas. The lamina 4, or the internal granular layer, has small cells that populate this layer, which process sensory information. We can find large pyramidal cells in the lamina 5, or the inner pyramidal layer. It is also the thickest in the motor cortex, and its main function is to control muscles by sending long axons to the spinal cord and other areas. Lastly, there is the lamina 6, or the multiform layer, which has two parts and consists of spindle cells. This layer receives axons from sensory nuclei of the thalamus and is prominent in sensory areas but is absent in the motor cortex. Okay, so fun fact lang before we proceed to the next part of the cerebral cortex. Yung six layers of the laminae ay matatagpuan lang sa mammalian brain. Bakit? Kasi yung brains ng ibang animals like birds, reptiles, and fishes ay mayroong structures. It also resembles the mammalian cerebral cortex, pero kulang sila sa layers. I believe they only have three layers of lamina, samantalang sa primates like humans, monkeys, and apes ay mayroon silang anim na layers ng laminae. Regardless naman, kahit magkaiba ng layers yung brain natin, nakaayon lang yung structures ng utak natin sa survival needs na kailangan natin para mabuhay. So let's tackle the next feature of the cerebral cortex, the vertical columns. It is also known as the cortical columns. These columns organize the cells of the cortex and run perpendicular to the laminae. Each column extends through the several laminae and may exhibit similar functions and respond to related stimuli. Napakahalaga ng vertical columns para mas mapadali ang pag-process at pag-interpret ng iba't ibang sensory information. Okay, so para mas lalong maintindihan ng cortical columns, isipin na lang natin na yung columns na yun ay groupings na ginawa natin sa class for reportings. Yung professors natin is considered as command center. Para maayos yung flow ng information ng reportings, may individual task yung groupings para masend yung information to different parts of the brain. Ganoon din sa cortical columns. Each of those columns ay mayroong neurons na magre-respond sa isang input. Let's just say, kailangan mo maglinis. Yung cortical columns, i-activate nun yung basal ganglia para gumalaw ka. At yung amygdala, that will make you feel relieved kasi malinis na yung kwarto mo. That's how important cortical columns are. Now that we have covered some parts of the cortex, let's take a closer look at how the brain functions in detail. The cerebral cortex is divided into four lobes: the occipital, parietal, temporal, and frontal lobes. They are named after the skull bones that lie above them. The first lobe is the occipital lobe, which is located at the posterior or the back part of the cerebral cortex. This region processes visual information like colors, shapes, and motion. It's also known as the seat of the visual cortex. So yung lobe na to ay hindi lang tayo tinutulungan para makita ang mundo, pero binibigyan din tayo ng kakayahan na bigyan ng meaning yung mga bagay at maalala kung ano yung nakikita natin. At ito yung pinakamaliit sa lahat ng lobe sa cerebral cortex. A part of the occipital lobe is the primary visual cortex or the striate cortex. It is located at the posterior pole of the lobe. It is responsible for interpreting visual signals from the retinas of the eyes. Each hemisphere of the brain has its own visual cortex and it receives information from the collateral visual field. In simpler terms, kung ano yung nakikita ng left eye natin ay pinapasa sa right striate cortex. Tapos kung ano yung nakikita natin sa right eye, pinapasa sa left eye. Bali baliktad yung pag-send ng pictures. Nangyayari yung crossover na 'to dahil kailangan ma-process ng dalawang mata yung buong picture na tinitingnan natin rather than processing it separately. The function of the striate cortex includes the perception of color, motion, and shapes, identifying objects such as faces, words, and sceneries, and it also helps with visual imagery. One detail about the striate cortex is that it has a striped appearance when viewed in cross section. When there is damage to this area, it can result in cortical blindness, where an individual loses conscious visual perception even when their eyes are healthy. The next lobe is the parietal lobe. It is located between the occipital lobe and the central sulcus. This lobe plays an important role in processing sensory information such as touch, temperature, pain, and spatial awareness. It also helps in spatial and numerical processing. Kapag nagkaroon ng damage sa parietal lobe, ay mahihirapan ang isang tao na mag-recognize ng shapes at distances. Maaari rin na hindi nito mapansin ng mga injuries sa katawan nila at maaaring mahirapan maintindihan ng isang tao yung basic concepts sa math. The central sulcus is a deep groove that serves as a landmark since both the parietal and frontal lobes can be seen on this part. And just behind the central sulcus lies the postcentral gyrus or the somatosensory cortex. This area receives and processes sensations from several touch, muscle stretch, and joint receptors. The postcentral gyrus is organized into four parallel bands of cells that are parallel to the central sulcus. Bawat bands ng postcentral gyrus ay nakakatanggap ng information galing sa iba't ibang parte ng katawan. Two of the bands process light touch information, one handles deep pressure, and the last band integrates both information. The third lobe of the central cortex is the temporal lobe. This is located on the sides or in the lateral portions of the brain near the temples. This lobe is responsible for auditory information processing. The temporal lobe also influences emotional and motivational behaviors. So, if damage is seen in this region, it can result in Kluver-Bucy syndrome, which can cause an individual who possesses this syndrome to lose their normal sense of fear and anxiety. Sa isang experiment kung saan ang isang monkey na walang temporal lobe ay napansin na nawalan nito ng sense of fear, anxiety, and danger. Dahil dito, hindi na sila natatakot, nagkaroon ng changes sa behavior nila. Like, pinupulot na lang nila yung ahas or pinaglalaroan yung matches. Normally, kapag meron silang temporal lobe, hindi nila ginagawa yon. So the left part of the temporal lobe is important in language acquisition. Sinusubukan ng left temporal lobe para maintindihan natin kung ano yung gustong ipahiwatig ng isang tao, pati na rin yung nakasulat sa written papers kapag nagbabasa tayo. And it helps with complex visual tasks such as perceiving movement and recognizing faces. Tumors in this region can cause vivid auditory or visual hallucinations. Kung ang left naman ay responsible for spoken language, ang right temporal lobe ay para maintindihan natin ang iba't ibang non-verbal information like facial expressions, sign languages, drawings, and symbols. The last but not the least is the frontal lobe. Extending from the central sulcus to the interior part of the brain, kung ang occipital lobe ang pinakamaliit, ang frontal lobe ay ang pinakamalaki sa lahat ng lobe. This is associated with reasoning, motor skills, higher level cognition, and expressive language. Kapag may damage na nangyari sa frontal lobe, mahihirapan ng isang tao na mag-reason out at mag-express ng maayos. At the front of the frontal lobe is the precentral gyrus. It is also known as the primary motor cortex and is located in the posterior part of the frontal lobe. This area receives signals from the sensory cortex and sends motor commands to the body's muscles through the spinal cord. Kapag may gusto tayong kunin na bagay, let's say a ball pen or anything in particular, ang precentral gyrus ay nagbibigay ng command na igalaw yung fingers or yung kamay natin para makuha yung bagay na gusto natin kunin. So the next part is the prefrontal cortex. It is located at the very front of the frontal lobe. So kapag binuksan natin yung skull natin, bubungad yung prefrontal cortex. It is more prominent in species with larger cerebral cortices, such as humans and great apes. It has a dense network of synapses that enables it to process immense amounts of information, and this part plays a role in higher cognitive functions including decision making, problem solving, and social interactions. Basically, the prefrontal cortex makes you who you are. Kasi ito yung nagbibigay ng personality traits ng isang tao, kung paano natin i-handle ang isang problema sa buhay natin, kung paano natin i-express yung opinions natin about certain things, kung paano tayo gumawa ng specific life goals, at kung paano tayo makipaghalubilo sa ibang tao. The prefrontal cortex has three regions. The first one is the posterior portion. Nakakatulong ito kung paano tayo gumalaw sa isang situation at kung need ba natin ihanda yung isang specific na body part para sa isang movement. The second one would be the middle portion of the cortex. It is important for memory, cognitive control, and emotional regulation. Working memory allows individuals to temporarily retain information. For example, lahat naman yata tayo naka-experience na utusan ng nanay na bumili sa tindahan. Tapos, sa sobrang daming information, tinutulungan tayo ng middle portion na to para matandaan natin yung lahat ng sinabi ng nanay natin. When there is damage to this area, it can lead to delayed response task, where an individual has impaired response on task that may require remembering information. And the interior portion of the cortex focuses on the decision making and evaluating possible repercussions. Individuals with damage to this region may find it difficult to evaluate the pros and cons or choices that will eventually result in impulsive decisions. The human brain is truly a work of wonder. It enables us to perceive, think, feel, create, and interact with the world around us. Next slide, please. But have you wondered how parts of the brain actually work? With all the nerves, synapses, connections, and regions of the brain, how is it able to make us function, process tremendous amounts of information, and even help us take up multiple tasks all at once? Well, one concept that explains the answer to that question is the binding problem, also known as the large scale integration problem, which is a fascinating study in neuroscience. It seeks to understand how our brain integrates information from various sensory skills, such as sight, sound, touch, taste, and smell, to create a unified perception of a single object or experience. Binding happens when sensations are perceived as simultaneous and spatially related. It allows us to make sense of our environment and integrate sensory information into cohesive experiences. There are a few experiments that perfectly illustrate how binding works, such as ventriloquism, where you see a puppet's mouth move while hearing the ventriloquist's speech. The voice aligns perfectly and the movements of the puppet, so your brain binds these two information together. And another example is the rubber hand illusion, where participants play one of the hands out of sight and a rubber hand is positioned where their real hand would be visible. Both the hidden real hand and the visible rubber hand are stroked or touched simultaneously in the same pattern. Over time, participants often start to feel as if the rubber hand is their own. Next slide, please. Early researchers believed that sensory information merged in cortical association areas and formed links in between sensations or memories. To break this down, imagine hearing a car beeping and you see one at a distance. It was believed that specific neurons in the cortical association areas combined the auditory and visual information to make a conclusion that the sound originated from the same source. While it's true that some neurons indeed process combined sensory inputs, later studies show that it's not purely automatic for our brains to come up to that conclusion. For example, if you listen to an unfamiliar song and at first you might struggle to find the tone, rhythm, beat, and tune, but if you were to repeat it multiple times, your brain learns to combine these sensory inputs effectively. And now that we have explored the parts and functions of the cerebral cortex, let's shift our focus to the tools and techniques that scientists use to study the brain itself. A- And understanding the structure and functions of the brain would not have been possible without advancements in research methods.